Welcome to Stories from the Village of Nothing Much. Like easy listening, but for fiction. I'm Kathryn Nicolai. I write and read all the stories you'll hear on the Village of Nothing Much. Audio engineering and sound design is by Bob Wittersheim. In our show notes, you'll find links to our ad-free premium version, our other shows, and some lovely, soothing merch to make your days and nights sweeter. Hello, October in the village. We were built for this. I have stories for you today about gourds and herbs, corn stalks and falling leaves, cider and fresh, crisp air. If you are new here, welcome. I tell family-friendly, conflict-free fiction. If you are someone who easily gets emotionally involved with the books you read and the characters you meet, and you wish sometimes they would all just relax a little and not put themselves in dangerous situations, not get their hearts broken or their hopes dashed, well, I am the storyteller for you. Because me too, and that's how I got started with this little village, which I think of as the grown-up version of Mr. Rogers' Land of Make-Believe. I needed someplace soft to rest my mind, and I started to tell myself stories as I fell asleep to make me feel cozy and safe. And then I thought, maybe other people need this? And I launched the bedtime story podcast, Nothing Much Happens. And 150 million downloads later, I'd say, yeah, a lot of people need it. And some of them, /us, need it during the day as well as at bedtime. So we created this show. I tell my soothing stories that celebrate everyday bits of loveliness. And Bob adds in a nice soundscape. Oh, go ahead, Bob, and put a nice sound here. Thanks. And as you listen, you refocus on the good stuff around you and on how it feels to be in your body while that happens. And that is some powerful medicine. And if you stick around after the last story, I'll share a little behind-the-scenes info with you. Speaking of powerful medicine, let's start by taking a deep breath in through the nose and sighing from the mouth. Nice. Do it again. Breathe in. And with sound, let it out. Good. Our stories today get you into the fresh autumn air to watch the leaves turn and fall. We'll start with the corn maze, or the Say Yes Club, where we'll travel with some friends out into the country and try our luck at getting lost and then found among the stalks. Then we'll step into the garden in Rosemary for Remembrance, to cut and cure the gourds, to smell the herbs at the end of their harvest, and to appreciate the nature in and around us. Finally, we'll put on our helmets and pedal out of town in autumn ride, to let the leaves rain down on us and to ring our bike bells under the trees. The Corn Maze, or the Say Yes Club. We were driving out through the country on our way to the maze, and it was a perfect day for a drive. Golden afternoon light shining on the changing leaves with clear blue skies and a bit of a nip in the air. The land was rolling here, so different from the flat streets in downtown, and as we rode slowly up a low hill and down the other side, I imagined myself on a very tranquil roller coaster, whose job was not to thrill, but to delight, to give the passenger time to take in beautiful views, to spot the farmhouses in the distance, to smile at the rafter of turkeys picking their way through a tilled wheat field, and admire the rolled hay bales scattered across the landscape. I watched it all from the back seat, as the chatter of my friends melted into soft background noise. I was thinking of a childhood memory It was a bit foggy. The details weren't clear, but the emotion around it was. A Halloween hayride with the neighborhood kids at the nature center. I remembered the feeling of the straw under my hands as I'd climbed up to scramble to a seat beside my friends. The electric excitement we shared as we were jostled together by the slow takeoff of the tractor. I don't think it had been scary, more Halloween-y, with carved pumpkins along the trail, lights in the trees, and owls hooting in the darkness. But to us then, it had been the thrill of the season. We'd gone home with treat bags full of candy and a whole caramel apple. And all these years later, when I thought back on it, I still felt a curl of excitement in my stomach. A smile spread over my face from the fun of the evening. Now here I was on a grown-up variation of it. Our little car was packed, and we were going to walk the corn maze. Our circle of friends had all met through a sort of unofficial club. We called it the Friendsgiving Club, or sometimes the Say Yes Club. A few years ago, some folks had started a Friendsgiving tradition, a dinner that was open to anyone and grew bigger and bigger till it filled the community center downtown each fourth Thursday of November. I'd seen a poster for it at the coffee shop I think it was their second year of doing it, and decided to go. The holidays can be a mixed bag. They're not always easy for everyone, and that particular year, I'd found myself pretending that they weren't coming. But that gathering had been so lovely, so fun, and I'd met so many new friends. It added a big piece to my feeling of community. Soon there was a group text of new friends who decided to try new things together, hence the Say Yes Club. When there was something someone wanted to try, but might feel intimidated to do on their own, we would say yes. Some of the things we said yes to were small and simple. Dinner at a new restaurant, entering into a putt-putt tournament, music in the park, and some were bigger. The polar plunge off the dock at the inn, the silent disco in the village square, a rather elaborate group cosplay at a con a few cities over. We'd backed each other up at high school reunions, tried with little success to play pickleball, and gone forest bathing as the spring plants were first emerging. Today we'd said yes to the corn maze. I'd never been before. It was always one of those things I'd wanted to do, meant to make happen before the season was over, but had never gotten around to. That was another lovely thing about this group of friends. We'd created a rhythm for new experiences, and because of that, they just seemed to happen every couple of weeks. That rhythm made it easier to put myself out there and live a little more deliberately. We spotted painted signs at a crossroad, corn maze ahead, and cheered in the car like a bunch of kids. We turned down a long drive, and I could hear the gravel popping under our tires. I rolled down my window and smiled into the wind. Fresh, autumn country air filled my nostrils, and a chill rolled down my spine, making me squirm in my seat. I was excited, just like I'd been at that hayride all those years ago. We found a spot for the car and piled out, buttoning up our cardigans and taking bets on which of us would be the first to get lost. It sounded like I was a favorite for that, but in my opinion, the whole point of a maze was to get lost, so yeah, I'd probably be great at it. We followed a trail past the parking lot and came to a little shed with a Dutch door. A woman sat inside with her elbows on the sill and waved us over. She told us that it wasn't just one big maze, but rather a series of them, which got a bit trickier as we moved from one to another. Did we want a map? She asked. I nudged my friend in front and whispered, "Say yes." He chuckled and pocketed it. It had a few quick exits marked on it if we decided we'd had enough fun. And there was also a number to call that would ring right here at the shed She pointed to a phone beside her, if we needed an assist getting out. The field full of high stalks stretched out in front of us. And before we set off, we fortified ourselves from the snack bar, buying bags of fresh kettle corn, cups of cider, and some small ladies' apples that fit into our pockets. Then into the corn we went, like stepping into a new world where everything smelled pleasantly of drying plants and wood chips, and the only colors were shades of brown and green and the bright blue of the sky. I thought that the details of today might become foggy with the years, just like that memory of the hayride, but that I wouldn't forget this feeling of being with my friends, having an adventure, and saying yes. Rosemary for Remembrance. I was out in my herb garden, back behind the edge of the vegetable patch, which by now had been mostly tilled down back into the earth after the last ears of corn had been eaten. We cut the corn stalks and tied them with twine and propped some along the front of the old red barn with a few bales of drying hay. I'd spent the morning harvesting the last few bits that the garden could give us before the hard frost set in. I had a section of gourds, grown mostly as ornaments and extra food for the rabbits and deer. There were soft-skin gourds, which were called curcubita. They grew with long, hooked necks and knobbly, shiny skin. They were green and gold, or a bright, sunrise orange-red, and most were small enough to be carried in one hand. I'd cut them from the vine and heaped them into wooden baskets. They'd decorate my table, sit in wreaths of bright red maple leaves on my porch, and the extra would be set out at the edge of the woods for any passing animal in search of a nibble. I also grew hard-skinned gourds called lagenaria. They were a tan, sandy brown and quite large. In fact, some had grown almost as big as my pumpkins. I'd harvested them one at a time, leaving a few inches of vine on the stem, and carrying each one to the spigot at the edge of the barn. I'd washed each gourd carefully in the cold water of the tap and laid them out on an old patched quilt in the autumn sunlight to dry. The gourds would cure over the winter, and their insides would slowly dry till they were as light as paper. I had a spot in the barn, warm enough that they wouldn't freeze in the depth of the winter, but dry and where the air could move around them. I'd set them out in a long row on a screen shelf with a bit of space between each one, and I would give them a turn every couple of months. In the spring, they would rattle when you shook them as their seeds danced around inside the hard skin. Then you could carefully cut into them to make an open space to fill with birdseed and a slot to thread a bit of rope, and then hang them out to feed the black-capped chickadees, the cerulean warblers, and the yellow-breasted chats. I might paint some in shades of sky blue or shiny black and give them to friends or neighbors. I'd spent some time cutting pumpkins from their vines and setting them in a row at the end of the long gravel drive. We had more than we could use or eat, so I'd set out a hand-stenciled sign asking a few dollars per pumpkin and left an old coffee can to collect on top of the mailbox. Now, in my herb garden, I heard the crunch of tires on the drive and looked up to see a couple and a little boy inspecting the pumpkins. The boy squatted down to run his tiny hands over the smooth, bright orange skin and the prickly green stem. It's a big decision to a little one. Which pumpkin was the right one? After a minute, he picked one, and though it took him a few tries, he got his arms around it and shuffled it back to his car. I saw his mom push a few bills into the coffee can, and she raised an arm to wave at me in the garden. I waved back and turned back to my herbs. At this time of year, many of them had already had their last harvest. I'd cut the last of the parsley, oregano, and basil in September, but there was still plenty of sage and sorrel and thyme. The thyme in particular smelled so good, warmed in the sun, that I rubbed it between my palms and cupped them in front of my face. I closed my eyes and pulled several slow breaths of it in. Rudyard Kipling wrote that thyme smelled like dawn in paradise. Thinking of the poetry of plants and herbs, I reached out to prune the last branches of rosemary. There's rosemary. That's for remembrance. Pray you, love, remember. And there's pansies. That's for thoughts. I said it aloud, though I was no Ophelia. I wasn't broken-hearted or lost. Instead, when I was in my garden, I was found. I thought of how abundantly nature gives. I'd harvested a few glossy gray Hubbard squashes that were at least 20 pounds each. They were sweet and nutty, and one could feed a family for a week. Those cured gourds would last indefinitely. Nature gives and gives and gives. I stood a moment pressing down through the toes of my shoes into the garden. I was trying to connect my body directly into the earth, to say thank you, to say, I am noticing how much you give, and I am grateful. I remembered a moment years earlier that regularly came to mind, when I'd said to a friend that I felt the strong need to be out in nature. He'd said, with kindness in his voice, "You are nature." Of course, he was right, and I'd carried that remembrance with me when I couldn't be in the open fresh air, or touch the soil, or walk in the thick groves of trees. I piled a few inches of pine needles over the pruned stems of the rosemary to protect her from the frost and the snow that would come. I cut bunches of sage for our Thanksgiving dinner and stems of catnip for the felines in the family. I tucked a branch of rosemary into the front pocket of my old flannel shirt so that the perfume would follow me all day. Rosemary was for remembrance, and I was remembering my place in the nature of things. Autumn Ride. The back door of the bakery was propped open wide, and the ovens were all running at full capacity. The mix of warm and cool air was one of my favorite things about baking in the fall. Over the fresh baked loaves and cookies, I could smell the clean, crisp scent of the outdoors. I wasn't actually supposed to be at the bakery today. It was my morning off. But I was up to something special. And my staff certainly didn't mind. While I was rolling out the cookies and proving the pastries, I moved hot bagels from their tray into baskets for the front counter and shaped a dozen loaves of sourdough. I got into that state of flow when I was in the bakery kitchen, when I felt like my mind and hands were perfectly connected and time sort of stopped. So they just put things in front of me and stepped back, and honestly, I loved it. I could hear the bell over the door ringing as customers came and went. I could smell coffee brewing and stopped to taste the apple filling for the pastries and just kept making, kept going. Back in the spring, when the bicycle shop first opened, the owner had come in and placed an order for several dozen cookies to serve on their first day of business. He had that tired but excited look that I remembered from my own first days owning the bakery. So many ideas, so much possibility, and so many little details that you hadn't considered until they suddenly demanded a solution. I'd taken the order myself, and curious as anyone about his new shop, had offered to deliver them the morning of. I'd made several types of cookies. Oatmeal raisin, because yes, some people prefer those, but also chocolate chip, so there would be no hard feelings. Snickerdoodle and peanut butter, and a few sugar cookies stamped out with my bicycle-shaped cutter and perfectly piped with colorful icing. The shop had been bustling when I carried them in and set them up by his coffee pot. I hadn't intended to buy a bike that day, but once I started looking, I suddenly remembered how incredible it had felt as a child to zoom down sloping streets in my neighborhood. How the rushing air had made me feel like I was flying, and I just couldn't resist. The shop owner helped me pick out the right sort of bike for how I like to ride, fitted me for a helmet, and ordered me an extra cushy, wide saddle so I could be as comfortable as possible. That first ride had been, well, joyful. Why had I ever stopped riding a bike? I remember that it had rained the night before, and when the wind blew, a shower of drops fell from the trees, and I'd laughed while I was pedaling. Yes, joy was the word. I felt free on my bike. So a few things had quickly become part of my routine. On Saturday mornings, I took a break to deliver more cookies to the bike shop. And whenever there was a group ride, I joined in. We biked through the old neighborhoods around downtown and even partnered up with the garden club to learn about some of the special green spots in our village. One Sunday, we rode all the way out to the inn, where we stopped for lemonade and coffee cake on their back porch, and I got to talk shop with their chef. While they hadn't divulged their coffee cake recipe, I had been given 2 jars of pickled cauliflower, which I'd brought home in my bike basket and savored over the summer. On those rides, I'd made new friends, learned the names of customers whose orders I knew by heart, and seen several corners of our town that I never even knew were there. It wasn't just exercise and fresh air. My days were richer because of the places I rode and the people I met. And today was our autumn ride, though we hoped it wouldn't be the last for the year. We were meeting where we always did, in the alley in front of the bike shop. So I packed up the apple turnovers into a giant sheet cake box and added a stack of napkins on top, and carried it out to strap into the carrier on the back of my bike. I'd ordered it specifically so I could bring treats on our rides. And so far it had held lemon cupcakes and green pea and potato pasties. And nothing had been crushed or lost. With my helmet on and my favorite hoodie zipped up to my chin, I pushed off the curb and started riding through town. It was a quiet day, and I liked passing by the shops and seeing them lit up inside with a few patrons in each. I started to hear the bike bells before I turned down the alley and began to ring my own. It was how we always greeted each other and kicked off each ride. There were a couple dozen of us today, and I was glad I'd baked a double batch, enough for everyone. I stopped to chat with a few fellow riders as everyone tightened their helmet straps and filled their water bottles from the sink in the bike shop. Then we were off, following the leaders out past the train depot on the edge of town. We rode through neighborhoods where leaves were being raked and Halloween decorations set up on front lawns, and kept going till we were on a dirt road, moving through a tunnel of trees, whose leaves were shades of orange and yellow and bright ruby red. The sound of a million leaves rustling in the wind, the sight of them rolling like waves, falling like bright raindrops. Again, it was pure joy. Someone rang their bell, and someone else hooted, and we all knew we were feeling the same thing at the same moment. At some point, we would find a place to stop, maybe near a lake, or at an outcropping at the edge of a valley, and we would sip our water and pass around the turnovers and take a few pictures. Till then, we'd pedal and breathe the air and ride under falling leaves. I feel so at home with autumn stories. Seasonality is a very big player in my work. I think because I'm always looking to bring in sensory experiences and the way the wind feels and smells, the sights and tastes of a season, they're so recognizable that they're great ways to do that. Just a reminder, if you are interested in practicing mindfulness more, it just means paying attention. Really, if you've tried meditation and you find your mind racing and you think, oh, I can't do this. I must not have the right kind of brain for this. Something is wrong with my brain. No. Mindfulness is just noticing whatever there is to notice. And part of that is noticing when your brain moves quickly from thought to thought. Trying not to think makes it worse. But once you kind of settle peacefully into the role of observer, you're not trying to control it, there is some space to notice other things too, like how something looks and feels and smells. I've taught meditation for about 20 years now, and I think we've failed a lot of folks by not acknowledging that the nature of your brain is to think, just like your heart's job is to beat, and you couldn't stop one any more than you could willfully stop the other. But just noticing, that's pretty universally available. If you have senses, there are ways to connect to the present. And you don't need to be seated on a cushion in a silent room like a statue for that. I mean, if that works for you, great. But you can also practice meditation when you eat, or when you take a shower, or you look out at the leaves changing, or in any moment when you observe in a calm way. This understanding has brought a lot of joy into my life. I'm always noticing colors and scents and textures. And when I'm doing that, I'm generally calmer and more at peace and seeing that there is a lot of enjoyment to be had. So if you need me to write you a note that says you don't have to sit meditation to be a meditator, let me know. Steps off of soapbox. Our first story today, the Say Yes Club, I feel like we will definitely hear more about their adventures in the future. And they've already appeared in our Friendsgiving episodes, which we haven't done yet on Stories from the Village, but we'll definitely be here in a month or so. I love this idea of having a group of friends to try things with. And after I wrote this, I used it as a way to convince friends of mine to do exactly that. I made a friend go to a big vegan tasting menu meal at a restaurant out of town. I made another meet me at a museum. My poor friends. But I feel like we need to do that for each other sometimes, especially after the pandemic. I know personally I got into a rut. I just stopped doing things. And if this is true for you, I encourage you to form a Say Yes Club in your village. Find some folks to do things with. Because, the days will pass either way. Our second story, Rosemary for Remembrance, is from way back in season 4 of Nothing Much Happens. And I remember after I wrote it, I sent Bob a message saying that I guessed I could now write a story about pretty much anything because I'd just written one on gourds. At the same time, I was working on a book proposal for the book version of Nothing Much Happens. And this was the last story that I included in that packet before sending it off. And when we did, my agent told me to go work on something else for the next month or so, that it would be a while before we heard anything, and that she wasn't, for my own sanity, going to give me the play-by-play. 2 days later, she called me and said, "Buckle up." We were hearing from publishers all over the world who wanted to publish Nothing Much, and over the next few weeks, I saw my wildest dreams come true. Since then, I've learned to dream wilder. My book was published in 35 countries, and I have a shelf full of them in different languages, with different covers to inspire me to keep writing. I still get goosebumps talking about it. And hey, why not buy my book? I have a second one written, but I need to sell more of the first one for the publishers to pick it up. So buy one or 3. They make excellent gifts. I think they should be on the bedside table, in your guest room, gifted to new parents, anyone who needs extra care and soothing, wherever you buy books. Steps off selling soapbox. Finally, We biked out of town in Autumn Ride. This story features lots of reoccurring characters. The baker, of course, the bike shop owner, the innkeeper, and chef. And the ride appears seen from another viewpoint in the story called The Lookout, as a hiker spies the trail of bikes cutting through the woods. Really, this is another story about having people to do things with. I notice I specifically write stories that feature others and then stories that feature being alone. Because I know everyone is built a little different and finds different things comforting and aspirational. And while I can't get it exactly right for every person out there, I do try to lean into themes I think will appeal to most. Which reminds me that in my book, I have an index of cozy at the back, so you could search by topic. Buy my book. Okay, friends, neighbors, fellow villagers, till next week, I wish you moments of company and activity, times of quiet and solitude, falling leaves, rosemary, and fresh air. Let's be good to one another today.